I think an important thing from the perspective of political sociology is the role of recruitment of elites and personalism in governing these countries and the long-term institutional consequences. What are the long-term consequences for public administration and civic life of the kind of statism or dirigism, as my colleague put it, that these cases seem to arise? What does autocracy enable and what does it constrain? What are the legacies of authoritarian development across cases? Bachman's paper raises a lot of issues, and what it needs, I think, is it needs to narrow itself a bit because it's raising many issues, and what will make the paper a success, indeed all the papers a success, the project a success, I think is thematic comparison. And that has to be theoretically brilliant to a greater extent. And that's what I think what we'll be doing is working toward that set of common concepts that will enable fruitful comparison and make these stories more than just the story of each country in a national sense. Well, that's it, and I'll turn it over.
Political scientist by training, and I spent a lot of time working on Japanese politics. I guess I wanted to, I wish that, although we did have one of the best David Bachman impersonators, that was really great. I wish David were here, because I think that some of the comments from Professor Burke and also from my colleague Steve Pfaff would be opposite. You know, when we think about the nature of this project, it's South Korea's modernization comparative perspective, and that really cuts two ways. One is to bring comparative lenses on the unique experiences of South Korea, and others to take what happened in South Korea's modernization and use it to build comparisons and theories that are broadly applicable. So I think that, Bachman's paper, which is the one I just want to engage with briefly here, is really broad. And it's a huge scope. So I think that we also have the possibility as discussants to try to offer up ideas which would be relevant for him to avenues for him to develop it most profitably. So I guess what I would like to encourage David to develop is one of the things that I found most interesting in the intellectual source material for this project, which is the relationship of neo-familism to modernization. And here there's a lot of potentials for looking at the Chinese family, neo-familism and its late development. The kind of classification of developers by period is very seductive, but I'm not sure it's necessary for this. This is a story about economic modernization whenever it takes place, and its relationship to this neo-familist concept that Rungschul articulated so successfully in his book, in which also, as we've seen in the afternoon, is applied to a late industrializer in the case of Italy. So that's my 2 cents here. For this to be a successful project, there's going to have to be more coherence in the final chapters for it to succeed as an edited volume, which I think is the goal. So I think that one of the areas that I'd like to ask the authors to consider to push is this very interesting engagement about neo-familism, which has an expression in South Korea which is quite powerful and widely recognized, but which we might be able to discover in other areas. And then then we really have the best of this comparison, as Professor Park encourages to think about explicitly about why we're comparing, that we can get some more juice from this comparison of this unusual case in Korea by bringing it really more fully into comparative perspective. So that's why I think that would work. Thank you.
Any other comments? Professor Park, I haven't seen you in a long time, and now you're coming back with such a stinging criticism about this. I really appreciate it. It's welcoming remarks and good comments. And Professor Kim also, we really appreciate. Not to mention my colleague now, Steve, and also Robert. I think I am compelled to say something because here the main purpose of this workshop is not about entire contents of the paper. As all the discussions, particularly Robert said, it is about how to contextualize the complexity of a late investigation to make it more comfortable. I think that's the ultimate task. It may be challenging, but as Robert said, there's some references whereby we could make things comfortable. For example, in the case of Orlov, after I read his rough draft, I think I hope that he focused on what he really the questions rather than only the explanation at this stage. I thought there's enough potential here to extract from the rich already these materials he suggested. So to be more specific, in response to the Professor Park's why question, why compare, what to compare, is when I thought about comparing Soviet Union to South Korea, actually it reminds me of my visit to Jackson School 1992. Actually, I was invited to a Soviet program at the time, not the Korea program. And my topic is exactly the same here. My topic was why can I think that I can compare Stalin with the President Park Geun-hye? Everybody, I think I raised the eyebrow that time. I mean, because as the Professor Park already seems to be upset, I think I made a lot of people upset at the time. So, but I said following. We can focus on the two things. One is the how based upon shared lateness, sense of lateness or backwardness, then how that affects the leaders' perception of the war and their strategies. That's one thing. The second thing is the more relevant, more important thing is because one of our propositions is late industrialization is bound to bring into tradition. So coming from that kind of perspective, how the two leaders actually willingly or willy-nilly brought their own respective traditions into the process of late industrialization. To me, by contextualizing the question in such a manner, we think we could, the two cases complement. So my response to Professor Park is that in principle I agree with you, but at the same time, we should not sort of dismiss the possible comparison simply because of the sort of self-evident differences. So let's say ideology, system, something. And my position is that given this ideological and systemic differences, there's some room for comparison, depending upon how we contextualize the issues. Okay? So that's my response to this part. And while, of course, we need to be truly cognizant of what you said, obviously, but then all things come down to contextualization. Then, from that perspective, this paper, this presentation to me is a long way to go. But then I think I was so much impressed with the rich information the Professor Orlov provided here, which could be really fruitfully exploited in the process of comparison. And then, in response to Steve and then Robert and then particularly Professor Kim's Bachman's comments, indeed, we all knowing he is comprehensive. So he let us to choose out of all this recipe that he provided. But I would say that there's one thing that I had in mind when I asked him to join us is that international environment. So, for example, South Korea's international environment was for late industrialization was cold, while that of China has been largely globalization. So how different international environments affected different strategies of industrialization, the different ways in which they introduce tradition, and ultimately different international perspectives. So once again, this paper also is about how to narrow down by further contextualization of the two cases.
Hello, I am Kyung Choi at Columbia University. Actually, I was a student in University of Washington in political science department. Today's presentation was very wonderful, and I think we can think about various methods for comparison, and we can also think about some theoretical aspects of modernization in a comparative perspective. I was thinking that when we compare different cases, I think we need to think about some kinds of interaction between different cases, because when I watched this presentation, I was thinking that even though presenters were addressing different cases, including Russia, Soviet Union, South Korea, China, and in the next session we will be addressing about Japan, Italy, and many cases. But I was thinking that can we say I was thinking that we need some kinds of interaction between among those different cases, because South Korea learned, well, I think there is some possibility that our political leadership in South Korea learned something from the experience of the Soviet Union, and the leadership in China might think some kinds of strengths and weakness of industrialization method of South Korea, and they learned something, and they tried to escape some kind of problem of South Korean experience. So I think we cannot think of some kinds of isolation between different cases. We need some kinds of process of emulation and process of historical learning. So in other words, I want to listen from the presenter about some kinds of relationship between different cases, including the relationship between Soviet Union and South Korea, and the relationship between South Korea and China. Thank you.
I mean, I think Professor Bachman was trying to get that away by talking about generations. I mean, one of the things about this, like, there's a second or third generations can learn from prior generation what worked, what didn't, and so on. And also, they won't bother with certain technological, dead ends or alleys because they know those didn't work elsewhere. So you're right. I mean, the learning part is an important part of this story, and I think his, potentially his generation's idea could be one way of grappling with that. But as Professor Park said, I think he's right. It becomes a little tricky to classify who's first generation, second generation, so on. Like if I take Italy, you could think of this as a first generation one. It was trying to industrialize at the same time as Imperial Germany. But I would characterize it as a failed industrialization, right? It didn't really succeed until after World War II, around the same time as South Korea in the second generation. So the generational story is a bit complicated, but you raise a really important issue, I think, about learning, and that might be one way to handle it.
Talk about generations made me think about the work of Alexander that I talk about a lot, because she characterizes these generations in a theoretical way, rather than doing them just temporarily. But she talks about 3 industrial revolutions. First one based on invention, the English one, basically. The second one based on innovation, which was like Germany, when Germany systematically applied science to develop new processes and products. And then the third generation she calls industrialization through learning, in which the basic process was not create new products and processes, but rather learning existing products and processes and doing them more efficiently with newer plants and so forth. And so that's a way of saying, oh, well, these things just weren't a sequence temporally, but also there's a structural difference within each one. So that's one thing. The second thing, I wanted to take Steve Pfaff's remarks up on the interrelationship between different countries at different times. And particularly for the industrialization of China, China was looking not only at the Soviet Union, but Deng Xiaoping had an elite think tank that was intensively studying South Korea's industrialization. And so the South Korean experience was part of how the Chinese elite were planning their industrialization. Now you get below the very highest elite, and no Chinese will admit that South Korea had any influence on China, because China is a great country Calgary's a little country. But if you go up to this very highly, thumb chopping, and a few people in a very think tank, we're looking at South Korea, and we're learning lessons from South Korea.
That, by the way, is my colleague, Professor Clark Sorensen, who's an anthropologist working on Korea.
Sorry, I didn't introduce myself.
International relations. It is very impressive to me actually, and also the topic is very interesting. That's why I'm participating here in later, I think, further sessions. I think Professor Park's question is very daunting and very challenging to me. First thing is the reason is the why. Why we compare and what we compare? I think I can simply say I can compare anything. I can compare with me and this basket. Only if I have some kind of meaningful stories to dig up. Then, so I think the whole this project made, I think, as I understand, the professor has intention is the lateness of development or modernization things. I think laters, almost all laters have some kind of feelings or urgencies or catch-up feelings and how to